So the title of the talk is Intelligent Architecture, Cognition and the Externalized Metaphysical Composition in Guarino Guarini's Placita philosophica. Well, it'll explain itself as we go along. Let's go ahead and to the next slide here. So Guarini was an Italian architect, as I was saying, from the Baroque period. He was born in 1624, died in 1683. He was born on the 7th of January in Modena, Italy, which is sort of to the southeast of Turin. He designed 16 buildings and wrote 10 treatises. He wrote a voluminous amount. He designed an incredible amount of buildings during his lifetime. Very sadly, only some of his buildings still exist. Some of them have been destroyed in one way or another, whether earthquake or what have you, and others have been rebuilt on top of. In 1660, Guarini was exiled from his religious order. He was a Thetan priest, and he was exiled, at which point he moved to Messina, Sicily. In 1665, he publishes his first real treatise called the Placita philosophica. Prior to that, he did publish something else, but it was more for the purposes of seminary students. It was a tragical commedia, which is kind of like a moral lesson, kind of a play for young Catholic seminarians to play out something theatrical about a moral drama. And that was called La Pietà Trionfante. In 1668, Guarini is commissioned to build San Lorenzo in Turin, Italy. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So his first treatise, the Placita philosophica, is this voluminous 800-page treatise, which establishes Guarini's system of philosophy in a number of different shoot, it looks like it's partly cut off. Can you see the whole thing? Can everyone see the whole slide there? It seems like it's partly blocked by the...
Yes, it's blocked for me as well.
Sorry about that.
Yes, it's a format problem with the original. Okay.
Oh, it's okay. I can basically say what it says anyway. It's just...
Sorry, but I cannot see you both and the PowerPoint. So either
okay. So anyhow, so it's a huge treatise, and he develops a system of philosophy. The Placita philosophica develops a system of philosophy in 800 pages, a very long, massive treatise, all in Latin. Areas from first logic, and then he moves on to physics, and then he moves on to cosmology, which is actually maybe even more like cosmography than cosmology, and then to nature in a biological sense, and then the last part of the treatise is on metaphysics. The first chapter on logic pertains specifically to the topic of the following paper that I'm going to read as the main topic of the lecture, because it deals with the Aristotelian idea of difference. Difference is a concept that is basically how it sounds, and put in the simplest sense. It is basically how we use the modern term of difference. It pertains to the difference between things, or anything, not necessarily things. The difference between this and that. So I sort of made up a make-believe story, kind of just in a fun way to introduce people to the idea of difference here really quick. From the kind of like make-believe life of Aristotle. Who knows, this may be in a old philosophical Greek text, it may or may not be. It just seems like something that would make sense that would happen. So just to put it into context. So just for fun, let's say Aristotle is walking one day by the Agora, the ancient market, As usual, he's quote unquote spacing out as a philosopher, which philosophers are also or often teased for doing. And he asks somebody at the market some question of some kind or another, and the man says to him, "I have no clue what you're saying. You're annoying me. I mean, you philosophers are always so weird. I mean, what's the difference? Asking such weird things. What's the difference?" He says, you know, he kind of this guy is heavily on his mind. He's a sensitive person. He gets depressed. He feels insulted, and then he wanders around. He sits at the park, and he finally says to himself, "What's the difference? What's the difference? Aha! I know what I'll do. I will write a philosophy of difference. I will show him what the difference is. I will write a philosophy of difference. You know, I'll show you what the difference is between this and that and other thing." So, so he turns this kind of like comment that someone makes to him into a philosophy. I mean, as someone who's like this, I've done the same thing. So maybe some of you can relate to that too. So, okay, next slide here, please. So just a little side note on the same kind of a concept. So in philosophy, words are often not simply terms that describe things. They're concepts. Like someone writes the book Anamnesis, or like Plato wrote Anamnesis, or Heraclitus writes Logos. So the title of the book is a word, not because it's just a word that has a definition like in the dictionary, but it becomes a very complex concept. So in terms of this idea of Aristotle's concept of difference in ancient Greek, what's the Greek word for difference in Aristotle's philosophy? The general definition in Aristotelian philosophy for difference has come to be known as diaphora. So Aristotle's answer to the man's comment in the Agora is not only to come up with an answer, but to come up with a multitude of completely different terms that describe difference as a concept. And now my knowledge of Greek is very, very feeble at this point, but I thought to just add this in because I think it's interesting. I'm just very, very learning phrases in Greek. I know hardly anything, but it's weird here because it feels like I know, since I've been here, it's different. I don't know. It's like I have this deep sense of knowing, like anamnesis, but I'm still trying to remember specifically, like objectively, what these things are like on paper, even though I feel like I have some, you know, anamnestic or noetic knowledge of something like in my soul or in myself. So anyhow, in Aristotle's Greek, there is not a descriptive adjective to describe different kinds of difference. Each term rather is in its own terms, which represents a specific concept or type of difference in and of itself. I don't know if anyone would agree with me on this or disagree with me on this. I may be completely naive, but in terms of my understanding so far, diaphora, there doesn't become like different kinds of diaphora. Instead, there's like so many different kinds of difference that he describes, not with an adjective prior to the noun, kind of a thing. So that's kind of my take on it for now. And by the way, in this lecture, there is no Greek at all. There is some Latin, but no Greek. But I'm just mentioning this because it's fun, because I'm here now in Greece. So thank you. Next slide, please. And this is where the paper begins. The paper that I'm referencing is entitled Quid differentia, Architecture and the Externalized Metaphysical Composition in Guarino Guarini's Placita philosophica. So I will just basically read it through, and that'll be the lecture. And it may take quite a long while. It's 20 pages or so, I think, but we have still 40 minutes, so bear with me, and there should be plenty of time for questions at the end. Here we go. The topos of difference runs a course through the history of ancient philosophy, originating in the Organon of Aristotle, the Isagoge Porphyry, and carried on in the Latin commentaries of Boethius. According to Aristotle, difference is a problem concerning the commonality of elements and their variation. This problem engaged medieval scholasticism in a similar quest involving the predication and categorical division between physical and metaphysical species into further intricacy and finite division, which leads to the development of early modern science. Specific to the methods of calculable observation, the development of knowledge according to difference expands further into the realm of experimental science and applied mathematics. The architectural language of the Renaissance reveals the forms of predication between genus and species in harmonious individuation, as in the works of Leon Battista Alberti that we see here, in which parts of a totality reflect the entirety of their own nature within themselves. Each part is adjoined to the totality of every other part within that whole, as a whole unto itself, like the ornate rosettes and allusions to solar cosmology found within the scrolls and pediment of Santa Maria Novella, the circularity of which symbolically represents an eternal and immutable totality. So it's saying here in the sense that if you see the motif on the side of the church here on the right, this kind of pattern I'm using as a symbol of this kind of immutable totality in the Renaissance, because it was said that Alberti's aesthetics had to do with every part equaling the whole and whole parts unto itself to create this kind of harmonious sense of nature and design. In the Baroque period, the perfection of this enclosed interiorized form has no continuum unto itself. Like a Ouroboros unlatching from its own tail through an evolutionary process, the difference between forms held in harmonic stasis are released toward the infinite, as in the mathematics of the asymptote found in Guarino Guarini's Euclidus ad Auctus. Guarini's seminal treatise, the Placita philosophica, presents a system of philosophy in 7 books. The beginning of Book 1, Preparatio ad Logicam, instructs the reader to interpret the structure of his logic through an architectural methodology. Each intricate facet of the treatise can and should therefore be interpreted didactically as a philosophy for architects. The precursor of logic is antecedent to all else in the Placita philosophica as a cognitive method through which everything else in the treatise is interpreted, and through which the foundation of the next 6 books are revealed on the subject of physics, heaven and earth, on light, generation and corruption, on life, and metaphysics. His system of argumentation develops in the first 5 disputations of Book 1, following the Proemia, which is logic, rational being, identity and distinction, universals in common, and on generation. The 6th disputation, entitled Quid differentia, which is part of the title of the paper, begins by defining difference as the advancement of a metaphysical composition which brings forth physical forms. Guarini provides a definition of metaphysics in Book 7 of the Placita philosophica as the knowledge of the supernatural, while physics is defined as that which is seen. The disputation on difference continues by providing a Porphyrian definition, stating that existence is brought forth from essence as an interior point of unification. Difference, then, is brought forth as nature separates from itself into genera that is accordingly assembled. According to the Euclidus ad Auctus, light is the true and immutable substance through which the universe is brought forth through mathematics as a living font. In Guarini's De Luce, light exists a priori, the creation of darkness, and therefore, without the presence of shadow, it is a substance which exists without form. The existence of light upon the complete absence of shadow exists simultaneously as both substance as well as essence, because its nature is diaphanous and incorporeal. Therefore, within the interior point of unification, difference exists as a concept in the mind, for which there is no external form in the physical world upon to reflect, thus presenting the first problem within the disputation on quid differentia. Light exists conceptually as a metaphysical composition without a mirror, a lens with nothing upon which to refract, lacking the ability to perceive form. The second problem of Guarini's disputation on difference is predicated upon the idea of negation as that which lacks essence, and this he defines as shadow. The absence of essence is the negation of light as substance. The logical unfolding of biblical cosmology reveals this progression as well, upon the creation of light and the division of darkness, as in Genesis 1 to 3 and 4. It is the existence of shadow which facilitates the perception of form and geometrical structure through accidents, the mathematics of dissimilitude, and what Guarini considers the arithmetic of inequalities, a concept involving architectonic spatial differentiation, which is later expanded in the Euclidus Adauctus and the Architectura civile. Guarini's refutation against Ioannis Bonifacius Bagata in the Euclidus Adauctus concerning the Aristotelian categories reveals a defense of the pure potentiality of form from nothing, which he also bases on the theological grounds. Just have to make sure of something here. Sorry, I have to pause just for a second. Okay, okay, we go on, sorry. Everyone still with me? Good, okay. As the disputation on differentia continues, Guarini conjectures as to whether or not difference is a universal or a particular. He states that it can be assumed that difference exists as a universal element because it exists both in the intellect as well as in matter being perceived. However, he continues by stating that difference is universal in the intellect, but not according to genus or species. It exists as part of, and yet is divided from, the cognitive process of the intellect. Difference creates substantial form in all of its complexity and multiplicity. The plurality of substantial form is present as that which lies within all matter. It is this unifying substance that is within, or at the core of matter, which makes possible the presence of being that is metaphysics. It is the interior point of unification which resides in the intellect, the point of origin from which everything else emanates from, a luminescence deep within the recesses of the soul which penetrates the mind. Guarini expounds upon the separation of the intellect and voluntary cognition in the second disputation of Book 2, entitled De Caelo et Mundo, and the De Intellectu et Voluntate Mentium Separatum. Guarini states in the De Intellectu that knowledge of the soul operates independently from other aspects of the intellect, which may be otherwise seen as misguiding or deceptive. This proposition appears to be in accordance with the Neoplatonist commentary on the first book of Euclid's Elements by Proclus, in which mathematical concepts exist discursively between the mind and the sensible world, as it reflects upon itself like a mirror, facilitating vision as it is reflected within the inner recesses of the soul. Universality, according to Guarini, is a concept which exists only in abstraction, and therefore subsumed by the process of predication involving difference into various genera and species. This process of dissimilitude in difference is divided further into the infinitesimal relation of opposites and the interaction of light and shadow, a process which relates to the demonstrations found in the Euclidus Adauctus through the interaction of light with the elements of mass, number, time, linear direction, and weight. The geometrical demonstrations found in the Euclidus Adauctus represent the cognitive frameworks and architectonic building blocks utilized by Guarini in architectural design and stereotomy. Guarini's Architectura Civile, his treatise on civil architecture, utilizes the element of shadow in order to create the reflection of form, as he states that it is the image of a created elevation, the shadow of which ingeniously represents the symmetry or the reason for the creation of future building. The differentiation between shadow and light are, therefore, directly related to the creation of architectural form within the mind of the architect, as in Guarini's reference to a metaphysical composition in the Placita Philosophica. The connection between the Placita Philosophica as a philosophy treatise and the Architectura Civile as an architecture treatise is therefore the relation between Guarini's philosophy of mind, metaphysics, and the application of these philosophies to the creation of built form in the physical world. The creation of architecture first represents itself as a cognitive intellectual process as interpreted within the disputation on difference, first pertaining to the human intellect and second to physics, which brings forth the creation of substantial form. It is within the formation of physical and substantial form that the division of opposites occurs due to the negation of light. Within physics, creation or actu and force potentia allow for the unity of metaphysical perception and the essence of divine creation. In Guarini's De Luce, light is synonymous with vision, the purpose of which is to illuminate the intellect, which is related to nocturne, in a manner that is intended to penetrate the densest night. As he says, lux ergo oculis lux, intellectus densissima nox est. Guarini's affinity with the interior origins of light within the mind may appear to align him with the optical theory of extramission, in which luminous vision is projected outward from the intellect through a vertex at the center of the eye in order to illuminate one's perception of the world onto sensible matter. The theory of extramission was prevalent in Arabic optical science until its refutation by Al-Hazan ibn al-Haytham, also known as Al-Hazan, in European medieval scholasticism, as in the works of Robert Grosseteste and Roger Bacon, as well as in the Italian Renaissance, as in the treatise on painting by Alberti. Can we go to the next slide, please, too? The presence of extramission theory in Guarini's Placita Philosophica reflects the primacy of vision and the illumination of the intellect over the importance of external and receptive perception. This distinction was also made by Al-Hazan, who, according to Nader al-Bizri, an incredible Ismaili philosopher of optics and philosophy, Al-Hazan devised novel methodological procedures that brought the certitude and invariance of geometrical demonstration to bear within isomorphism, instead of mere synthesis, on his research in physical optics. The theory of isomorphism references Guarini's theory on difference, in which atomi are propagated and symmetrically scattered through difference that extend into the physical field of perception. The representation of atomistic symmetry can be seen in the design elements in a number of Guarini's architectural works, which reflect evolutionary processes found in nature. Nature, in Guarini's disputation on difference, is the generative principle, which creates physical form through rational dissimilitude, as in the Natura Naturans of Plotinus and the architectural theories of John Shannon Hendricks, another very incredible architectural historian and theorist of our time. Architecture, therefore, is based on the autopoietic, self-generating aspects of nature, but in a manner that is abstracted through rational form through the cognitive separation of the intellect from direct sense perception. In Guarini's theory on difference, this pertains to the importance of light as the vision of light, and thus the process of difference occurs first as a metaphysical composition present in the mind of the architect. Hence, further explanation of the title of the paper as being a metaphysical composition within the mind, projected onto design or architecture. Light is vision, the projected light within the mind, which reflects upon its absence as shadow in the creation of architectural form. However, the interconnection between interior and exterior, revealed in Guarini's anatomical studies of the eye, suggests that his theory of optics is a synthesis of the two theories of intromission and extromission, previously seen in diametrical opposition, as in the refutation of Alhazen. Guarini's theory of the relationship between light, vision, and architectural form is expounded upon in the seventh disputation of Book 6, De Vivientibus, entitled On the Miraculous Architecture of the Eyes, entitled De oculi mirabili architectura. The disputation begins by stating that the eye is one of the most hidden and complex aspects of the human anatomy, constructed of three parts: muscles, membranes, and fluids. The disputation continues, expanding upon the complex interior anatomical structures of the eye, stating that, quote, the optic nerve envelops everything that is brought forth before the eye, while on the other side of the membrane, it creates definition through its interconnection. Perception is guided by the envelopment of the optic nerve and its connection to the brain, upon which the image being received is flipped because of the vertex created by the optic nerve at the round base of the eye. However, Guarini continues by stating that upon the moment of interconnectivity between the internal and the external, movement is created, where one side of the vertex begins to spin through an attraction of angles, and the other side spins in the opposite direction, creating iridescence within the eye. The pupil is described as a receptor of motion, as in the torque of the earth spinning on its axis. The crystalline humor is connected to the cornea, creating the brilliant colors and patterns found within the iris surrounding the pupil. I think, let's see. We can almost go to the next slide, but let's just stay here for a second. Guarini's oculi continues by referencing a number of scholars whose research must be celebrated for their knowledge of the fundamental aspects of optical anatomy, those being Galen or Galenus, Vitellione, otherwise known as Vitello, Andreas Vesalius, a very famous anatomist from the 1500s, Hieronymus Fabricius, also from the 1500s, Bartholinus, also known as Rasmus Bartholin, from the 1600s, Francis Aquilonius, from the 15 and 1600s, as well as previously mentioned Alhazen, of course. Galen and Vesalius brought forth the knowledge of the structural design of the glacial or crystalline humor. Fabricius and Vitellione brought forth knowledge through Alhazen, who excelled in the knowledge of the pupil and its great importance. Aquilonius points to the envelopment of the cornea, while Bartholinus clarified the subject of the non-transparency of the crystalline humor. Guarini's reference to the aforementioned optical scientists, both antecedent as well as contemporary to his own time, proves his own erudition on the subject and places his own theory of the optical architecture within an anatomical, highly knowledgeable academic framework. Architecture here in quotes for a couple of reasons. Architecture, literally, in terms of the eye designing architecture and building, as we're looking at what we're building or designing, as well as architecture of the eye in terms of how the actual anatomical structure of the eye is structured, is formed. So in that sense, Guarini is saying that the actual structure of the eye, the physical structure of the eye and how it receives light, is a model by which we can create architecture, so that one thing is like a simulacrum of the other. It's a very interesting concept in a lot of his work. So let's see. In terms of difference, there are parallels that can be drawn between Guarini's theory of light as a vision of light, as in lux ergo oculis lux, What is stated in Expensio 6 of De Oculi pertains to the participation of the eye in the perception of the object and the expressivity of vision. Guarini theorizes that the objective power of sight is constructed of light, stating that the appearance of an object contains color due to the anatomical constitution of the eye and as an organ. Contrary to Galen, Guarini believes the iris to be permeated with light surrounding the pupil, rather than the glacial humor. It is the intelligence contained within the eye that creates complete iridescence. The pupil, rather than receiving light, is distinguished from the iris which surrounds it as darkness, or tenebrosum. However, because it is the absence or negation of light which allows form, it is logical that the pupil, by its necessity as a receptive and or generative organ of the perception of forms, that it is dark and tenebrous. The synthetic relationship between intromission and extromission in Guarini's optics exists in the interconnectivity between internal logic in the connection of the eye to the brain and external logic in the connection to the external world and the creation of architectural form. Guarini's De Luce describes light through a lens in a similar manner to the interconnectivity between intromission and extromission in the De Oculi, stating that light through a concave radial surface is dilated while a convex surface restrains it until it is brought to a point, and it is thereby projected as linear rays, as is the purpose of the iris surrounding the eye, which expands or contracts according to the amount of light being received through the oculus. This relationship between the anatomy of the eye and the lens can be studied in relation to Guarini's use of hyperbolic geometry within the domical structures as found at San Lorenzo. A dome which strikingly resembles the description of the pupil as a lantern, surrounded by the patterns of the iris represented by the interlocked catenaries and fenestrations as found in the De Oculi. The perception of light and shadow in relation to movement and time is evident within Guarini's disputation on difference, according to the propagation of physical forms into the field of perception through accidents. Let's go to the next slide now, please. See, sorry. This relationship between light, movement, and time also exists in Guarini's theory of architecture, as presented in the Architectura Civile, in which he presents three principles: the art of building, edificare, the study of time and the creation of sundials, which he states as both orologia and mnemonica. One is the study of time, the other is creation of sundials, and mechanics, machinaria, which he derives from Book 9 of Vitruvius's De Architectura Liberecem, otherwise known as the 10 books on architecture by Vitruvius. The art of building is related to difference, as in Guarini's studies of elevation, when a shadow is cast upon light, illuminating the architect's imagination by creating form. The study of mnemonics is related to difference, as the gnomon casts a shadow upon the dial, creating form through the separation of light and shadow, incrementally tracking the movement of time according to the diurnal passage of the sun. At the core of this theory is celestial mechanics, as defined by the axis mundi, verticality that extends from the center of the earth to the zenith, and is the center point upon which the earth rotates. The simulacrum of movement is created between the earth and its motion, and the movement created within the eye upon the spinning of the vertex, as described in the De Oculi. The study of mechanics is thereby related to the first two principles of building and the study of time, due to the diurnal movement of the universe, as it is perceived internally within the receptive organ of the eye, and externally through the motion of the planet around the zenith. Guarini's concept of the axis mundi first appears in the Paremia of the book on heaven and earth, in Libros de Caelo et Mundo, in the Placita philosophica, intended as part of Guarini's deliberation on universal composition. Guarini describes a celestial map of the heavens, Ethereae Domos Ignographium, in which he describes the cartography of stars around the Earth, known as the celestial sphere. The axis point at which the planet spins, he refers to as the polo, or pole, and later in his treatise on celestial mathematics, the Caelis Mathematicae, as the axis mundi. Book 9 of Daniele Barbaro's commentary on Vitruvius's De Architectura also demonstrates the astronomical principle of the polo, describing the passage of the sun and the effects of shadow along the meridian. Barbaro continues expounding upon the knowledge of Vitruvius's theory of architecture, revealing in the next image a hemispherical sundial, or hemicyclium, or analemma, which resembles the interlocked catenaries that comprise the interior dome of San Lorenzo. So in this image here on the right is from the Placita philosophica, in which he starts to describe this kind of cosmology. So you have the center of the world as it turns, described in the Caelo et Mundo, and in the other Ethereae Ignographium, and then he connects this universal movement to the design of San Lorenzo's dome. So these are just some of the earlier illustrations he has of these ideas of how the universe connects through cosmology and those things in the Placita philosophica. It's actually at the beginning of the book called De Luce in the treatise. So we can go to the next slide now, please. And this is the Church of San Lorenzo from the outside. If any of you have ever been to Turin, it's like amazing. If you haven't been, you should go. It's one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been. Right there, south of the Swiss Alps. And this is a view of the church from the outside. Completely different from the outside. 1968 and commissioned by the Savoy dynasty. The mathematics utilized by Guarini in the Dome of San Lorenzo is represented in the Euclidus Adauctus, which describes hyperbolic structures that approach the infinite in both direction and movement by utilizing the mathematics of the asymptote. Guarini states that the asymptote is created by intersecting tangents, which are placed in minimal quantities in close relation to one another upon a hyperbolic surface, creating torque around the axis mundi and an expansion of space that approaches the infinite. We can go to the next slide now, please, too. So in this one, just to take a step back, this is the interior of San Lorenzo as you're looking up from the floor directly upward at the dome. And as you can see, it's very Arabesque. It looks very Islamic in a lot of ways. It looks like it could be almost like the interior of a mosque. And this, I think, has a lot to do with experience he must have had studying first Arabic optics as well as Arabic optics, or Middle Eastern optics, I should say, not necessarily Arabic, from ancient times that were later brought to Europe in the Middle Ages and translated first from Greek to Arabic, and then to Arabic from Arabic to Latin in the Middle Ages, where they translated it in medieval monasteries and such in the Middle Ages, like during the time of Aquinas and Albertus Magnus. So this on the right, like I said, is the dome looking up, and here we have the model of this thing he calls the analemma, which is basically a way to chart how the stars move around. And as you can see, you can see from the image the direct relation from one to the other in terms of how the crisscrossed catenaries of the dome here on the right are very, very similar to the design of the analemma. So what I'm showing here is basically how he designs kind of like a astrographic model of the universe within this incredible architectural space by designing it similarly to this analemma on the left, which is meant to be a kind of astrolabe, or way to chart the stars moving in the heavens. So the geometries of the asymptote are utilized in the cupola of San Lorenzo, in which two intersecting quadrilaterals in the lantern are placed at the center point of the two intersecting pairs of catenary curves in the dome, which are turned once again at 45-degree angles from those in the lantern. The hyperbolic verticality of the dome creates the effect that the two intersecting sets of catenaries appear as though there are 8, which intersect in proximity to one another at the springer, as they elegantly rest upon double sets of abaci along the perimeter of the drum. The interior point of intersection at which the two catenaries intersect creates another set of intersecting quadrilaterals, which are placed at 45-degree angles from those in the lantern. Placed between the vertices of those quadrilaterals are lunar-shaped fenestrations, hemisected by the expansion of the catenaries from the springer. At the opposing points of the intersection are inverse pentagonal fenestrations placed above the scalloping windows in the lower verticality of the dome above the drum. The geometry present in the cupola of San Lorenzo represents the isomorphic as well as automorphic geometries that appear to symmetrically fold upon themselves and spin on their axis, while conserving their original sense of form and symmetry. Difference relates to accidents through the propagation of symmetrical forms, which relates to the elements of time and movement according to the element of light as it moves within the interior of the dome. The sophisticated multitude of polymorphic fenestrations within the dome interact with the complexity of solid forms created by the brilliant interlacing of architectonics, dissolving the solidity and weight of the catenaries which comprise the dome into patterns of light. The complex luminosity within the dome creates refraction more so than reflection, as in Guarini's theory of the miraculous architecture of the eye in De Oculi. In relation to light and shadow, the gnomon creates a shadow upon the dial of the analemma, as found in Vitruvius' 10 books on architecture. The sun moves within the interior of the space, as is described in Barbaro's commentary, in which he states, there are two places set at angles which create constant motion within their subtended meridians, which intercept the sun, points in which the meridians end, and the movement of this part yields latitude, and the sun creates shadow. Barbaro's explication of Vitruvius continues, stating once again the reason why it is necessary to begin with two planes or catenaries, as at San Lorenzo. The angles create a visual spectacle due to their construction and the positioning of the sun as the vertical planes which draw forth shadows. For the realization of the two angles are notably useful to horology because they describe vertical planes, and because according to their angled ratios, the altitude of the sun is above each indicated plane, creating instead the perception of a shadow, thus creating the true understanding of the visible latitude of the sun. Barbaro's commentary on Vitruvius echoes the second problem of Guarini's disputation on difference, that shadow is the negation or void, the absence of light, and is therefore the perceptual causation as it is reflected and refracted as form, as can be seen at San Lorenzo. The curvilinear planes of the analemma cast a shadow according to the passing of the sun, and its inclination according to latitude, which is horizon, and altitude, which is the zenith, thus necessitating the presence of shadow in the calculating of its movement and the presence of light itself. Guarini's description of difference, beginning with a metaphysical composition that precedes physical form, expresses a cognitive process sorry, I lost my place here. Expresses a cognitive process realized through the external projection as light is cast upon shadow. The connection between Guarini's theory of architectural optics in the De Oculi and the dome of San Lorenzo creates an intriguing simulacrum between the internal logic of the mind the capacity for vision, and the external perception of light within a universe in perceptual motion. This internal motion is expressed as part of the optical processes contained within the eye, as it is attracted to physical dimension and form. The external aspect of this motion is described as the motion of the earth spinning on its axis, which Guarini ascribes to the principles of architectural design from Vitruvius to architectura, and in the architectura civile. And just to conclude, according to the architectural historian and sociologist Werner Oestlin, quote, "The history of light in architecture has yet to be written," unquote. My goal in the preceding essay, based on Quid differentia, a relatively small disputation within the voluminous work that is the Placita philosophica, is that it may serve as a starting point, revealing a specific aspect of Guarini's cognitive process. What is described as a metaphysical composition in Guarini's disputation on difference may get closer to the root of what exists in the mind of the architect as an interior point of unification, of light within the mind prior to the perception of, and thereby the creation of architectural form. The conceptualization of this idea does not concern merely the primacy of light as an external or even as a theological source, but the perception of, but the importance of internal vision, like a brilliant spark of illumination that sets the night on fire. Light proceeds from the inner recesses of the mind through the eye, bringing forth the architect's ultimate realization of design within the world of forms. If a different starting point is chosen within the Placita philosophica or within any other treatise by Guarini from which to expound, a different conclusion may be revealed that would never fully encompass the immense amount of knowledge contained within the architect's literary and architectural oeuvre. Thank you. Done. All right.
Thank you, Noé. Thank you very much. And that was extremely interesting, I have to say.
Thanks.
There are only a few things I know about this specific tradition. And I found extremely interesting, I have to say, this isomorphic analogy between the structure of the eye and the architecture of the building. And this use as a background of the optical science and medical science and of his own time, and the Platonic, the Neoplatonic, if you can say, perspective. I wonder if there are any questions from the audience about this interesting aspect of the intelligent architecture that was presented today. Because I have a question to ask, to be honest. I'm, of course, it's of course of my own. Actually, two questions. The first question is about the Neoplatonic tradition at his own time. Do you know if it was used as a medium to create an intelligent architecture, or it was just the architecture itself, or it was just the Platonic forms that they are expressed in his own architecture?
Like this, the difference between, was it like an applied philosophy, or was it?
Yeah, it was an applied philosophy, or just a background?
I mean, Plato, I mean, if we narrow it down to Platon himself, I don't, there's definitely Plato in the Placita philosophica. Unfortunately, I don't always know if I reference it directly here in terms of Plato himself, but obviously, like, the nearest neo-Aristotelian tradition is completely permeated within the Placita philosophica. In fact, there's been like many schools of thought that's kind of, in speaking with a few other scholars that have studied the Placita philosophica a bit, they really kind of group it into just generally neo-Aristotelian philosophy in a very general manner, I think. To me, it's a bunch of things that I'm trying to work out that are very much more specific. But obviously, Euclid, Aristotle, Plato, all of these major Greek philosophers permeate the Renaissance and into the Baroque period. So, and to answer your question, I don't think that you would arrive at Platonic forms as architecture, which obviously they are based on Platonism, Euclidean geometry, and all these things, if you didn't have those mathematics to make them. So you have the theory or the praxis, the theory of the practice, the theory behind the practice, and then you have the application of that architecture as actually, you know, building, designing and building and cutting the stone and, you know, lifting the stone and putting blocks in place and creating the actual building as a physical process. But it's very, very interesting to me, like it's it gets very, like, how do I put it? It's like metaphysical in one sense, because Guarini is actually saying, like, when you look at a form and the form has light coming from a certain direction and it casts shadow, he's saying that the shadow cast by that light is creating another form, essentially. Even though it's a shadow and it's ephemeral or just an absence of light there, it's the potentiality of future forms. So I would think, I mean, without knowing exactly where to reference, like the Politeia or the Republic right now, or like the Ion or the Timaeus, it's obviously like it's in there. I mean, I think you could see, like, you know.
Definitely, yes, of course.
Yeah.
And there might be also other, it sounds like this distinction between intelligible and perceptible matter, and how far perceptible matter reflects to some extent the forms in a different extension. And which is, I think it's, I don't know where in his background, but it sounds like this distinction in Renaissance Platonism between different forms of matter taken from the Platonian understanding of the distinction, because this is very interesting also.
That sounds a lot like your work with Plotinus, as I was going to say. Like, you know a lot more about Plotinus than I do at this point. So I think it's in there in Plotinus as something that's definitely Neoplatonic. Like, he develops these other things from Plato and kind of like takes it further and solidifies certain concepts, I would say, you know, about that.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
It's really fruitful and complicated on the one hand, but also very, very fruitful on the other hand.
That's the interesting thing about the Renaissance in terms of how they thought of design and architecture, because in one sense it's very metaphysical and abstract, and on the other hand you can just take it literally, that this shadow creates another shape. You can take this shape of the shadow and create another form and add that, and it's literally another block added onto it. And that means something both literal as well as abstract, metaphysical. It's sort of like all these different layers working together. You know, it's amazing.
Yes, and I don't know about this period, but it sounds also that's another, but we don't have actually the time today, but like some moral implications of the intelligent architecture, and since it is a form of divine architecture, and there might be some, this dialectic between the light and shadow, might be also a moral dialectic that actually reflects not only the forms but also the good in the Platonic terms as a way of noetic ascent. And so here is also how intelligent architecture might be. Of course, I'm just supposing, and I'm not sure about that. Has also a moral value in this.
That's very interesting to me too. Yeah, sure.
Since there are no other questions, Noé, thank you very much for your presentation today. It was great to have you. It's a very unique topic, and we tried to explore the idea of intelligence and forms of cognition in IPT. And I think that your perspective is extremely interesting because it highlights something that is clearly around us, has practical, but also significant aesthetic, but also scientific and mathematical exposition. Thank you very much for bringing a light to this topic. And thank you all for participating in our IP talk today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're very happy.